Hello and welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piscor.
And I'm Tom Scholey.
Gonna go through comic scene number 25. This was like my magazine before Wizard really took over it. And in some ways, this is the issue probably where Wizard takes over for me, because that was the first Wizard I bought, was the Rob Liefeld cover. So before we dive into this one, Ed, tell us about Red Room.
4 issues in the wild as we speak. Red Room is about murder on the dark web for fun and profit. Every single issue completely self-contained. I still haven't got my comps for issue 3, Jimmy. Goddamn. Every issue completely self-contained, tells a complete story. If you see an issue, grab an issue. If you read multiple issues, you'll see the tapestry that is slowly unveiling. I have this free Comic Book Day comic at my Patreon, available to download for free right now. Go to patreon.com/edpiscor. $3 for the entire archive of the more than 100 pages of comics that are up there as we speak. And I put new strips up every Tuesday.
Tom, where can people find more of your work?
Well, here's Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and you can find it from 10 Speed Press, a division of Penguin Random House. It's the story of Jack Kirby told in the comics form, his own personal art form.
I was talking to James Sturm yesterday, and we were talking about this book and singing its praises. So I don't know if you've heard from him personally or not, but he enjoys this book, Tom.
Oh, wow, that's a ringing endorsement. I hadn't heard that till now. Thanks for being the bearer of good news. Unlike what you usually are, Jim. Just kidding.
Whoa.
And here's Fantastic Four Grand Design from Marvel Comics, a subsidiary of Disney Corporation. And this is, the story of the Fantastic Four, all in one volume. And as a bonus, you got a beautiful recolored version of This Man, This Monster in the back. And you can also check out my YouTube channel, Total Recall Show.
You can join me on patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can download my out-of-print zines and mini comics. I have about a dozen of those up there, like this ballpoint pen notebook collection.
Super important to see that in this.
Tying it all together, right? I have about a dozen of those available, and they basically show off a lot of my art, some of the stuff that I experiment with, and you can see things like scripts and pencils and layouts for some of my comics. You can see how I make those comics and get a behind-the-scene look at my art and process. Patreon.com/JimRugg.
So yeah, you mentioned about reading this and then going. This is like the handoff to Wizard. Like I've heard like you and Ed talk about like the interview where Liefeld like is laying down all his plans for Youngblood. So this is the interview.
This
All
is
their
a great one.
interviews, all of like the interviews that they would do in other media would be similar, and that's where you would know that their Youngblood is sort of a celebrity team or something like that.
Because it would also be like, oh, combat, he's this alien. You would get the origin of like all the characters just in the natural course of like, well, describe Youngblood, who's on Youngblood, and that's where you would get like all the information of who the characters are, what they're dealing with, the setup.
You wouldn't get it from the comic.
No, you would. The stuff the description for this comic makes it sound amazing. Like I still want to read this comic.
It's literally the stuff that Eric Stevenson contacted Rob Liefeld about, like, hey man, like, there's nothing in the comic that's like the interview. Can I help out with that? Rob says yes or whatever. He becomes the writer of like all the Extreme Studios. He's the Stan Lee, the guy putting the words in the mouths.
And was he like younger than Jim Shooter? Was he like 7 at that time?
But by the way,
so young.
So you stepped on my punchline, man, because I was going to say,
well, you can edit that out.
when he jumps on board, it still is incoherent and just like a bunch of action figures batting together. There's no character shit. There's none of that stuff.
This is a lesson.
They didn't do anything.
If you want to get into comics, there's a lesson for you. Just write a nasty letter to your favorite creator. Tell them everything that's wrong with their comic, and you got a job for life. He's still working there.
He's running the ship now.
Man, that's Stan Lee's life story.
Comic Scene though was like the first comics magazine that they had newsstand distribution. It was a big color glossy, and so I would buy these things, and it was, again, I just wanted to know more about comics and behind the scenes and how to break in, and so this was the first magazine that I got that sort of covered that stuff. Where you would get interviews with cartoonists, you would get to see sometimes works in progress, and that was huge that was huge for me. I would read these things every word, cover to cover. So kind of fun to dive back into one of these things, because for me this was like the pre-Wizard comics magazine.
From the people who brought you Starlog, and Wizard became so huge that it kind of put all this stuff out of business in a way. Like gave these mags a little bit more life, but once we all jumped to Wizard, there's no more Amazing Heroes.
Yeah, now and then you'll see some of the names will cross over.
Saw some Andy Mangles here and there.
Yeah, so I always check that part because it is a small world. Amazing Heroes, you would see these names sort of, these are freelancers that are writing for this stuff.
Did you read this piece, Jimmy?
I did. So the letter column, first letter, is Peter Laird writing in to straighten out some stuff about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated cartoon and what Fred Wolf did and didn't do, which I guess he's a producer or he's
the animation guy
from the animation company, but claimed that he put a lot of stuff into the Turtles canon, and Peter Laird is refuting those point by point.
There was the Kevin Eastman interview that we unpacked that he did with Gary Groth from Comics Journal, and in that interview we discovered that there's the sort of headaches that come with having such a wild success, having to put a certain amount of money into a war chest to just handle all your legal issues and stuff. And in that conversation, laid out a bunch of people who were suing them, and it would be people, that they knew as kids who had pet turtles were suing them. And it got to the point where, like, even the animation people, the people who they worked in good faith together for five
contracts,
five seasons, stuff in stone. And there's suing going on there, like it's just like it's a business move, and it's kind of like an appropriate move in business for this kind of thing to happen. I think of like when Howard Stern went to from regular radio to
terrestrial, to satellite.
Satellite. The people, at the top of the terrestrial company are like giving him well wishes on the very last episode. And then he has to wait a certain contractual amount of time to start satellite. And he gets sued by the people who patted him on the back and sent him off. Because that's what you do if a guy has $500 million and he left your thing. You talk to your lawyers and try to see what you could squeeze out of them. It's just how business works.
It is, unfortunately. Yeah, it is. Yeah, we could tell stories about that all day, but cartoonist kayfabe, right? Not
we gotta talk
kayfabe. Wake up, guys.
About Luke Cage.
I dug Luke Cage, and I dug Turner. Dwayne Turner is your artist on this Luke Cage series. I knew Dwayne Turner because he had done Black Panther. I want to say Panther's Prey, but it might be a different miniseries that was reproduced from his pencils.
Yeah.
And man, that was a big deal for me. I tracked that series down because I'd never seen that, and to me it was like this elevated cartoonist. He's so good he doesn't need an inker. Really rad, so I kind of followed him. And I mean, he went on to work for Todd McFarlane when Claremont starts his creator-owned series at DC, Superior 7.
Sovereign 7.
Sovereign 7?
Yeah.
Turner's the artist that he chooses for that, so interesting artist. And, this should have been good. This series, I think, is terrible. It's unreadable. There's so many freaking words on it. I don't know this writer, McLaren. It's not a writer that I'm familiar with, but I just remember I bought this full run when I was doing Aphrodisiac as reference and tried to read it and could not get through the reading because it's so verbose and useless. The writing is just hard to read sentences. It's very disappointing.
It was the default style at the time. Do you remember when John Singleton was working on a Luke Cage movie?
No, that sounds
it was
good.
Before all this Marvel stuff. His treatment sounded awesome.
This had to do.
This is, by the way, I talk about advanced art. That they would use. You can see the color codes written in this. This is your color guides are what they're reproducing here.
Yeah, you could see the stuff up top there and everything. This series had to do pretty well in terms of volume because I pieced together a giant run of that, almost a year or two after it happened, just because they would be ganged up in multi-packs that you could get at Toys R Us.
Is that a sign it did well, or is that a sign
No,
it didn't?
There's
a large printing run.
A lot of stuff came back from newsstand and they put them in those packs.
Yeah, and listen, man, you make your money. They made their money.
Yeah, I mean, you see, copies of, Youngblood or
Fair enough.
X-Force in those
But
multi-packs.
this series disappoints me. I think of all the cool Luke Cage comics, and unfortunately, this is not the series to go for, in my opinion.
Mark Tex, baby.
Yeah.
Love this stuff. Texeira, I was just talking to somebody, and I was like, it's not so much that I love Ghost Rider, but I love Mark Texeira's Ghost
Interesting,
Rider.
yeah.
Absolutely. And, man, talk about the zeitgeist when things like Nine Inch Nails are hitting, that kind of grunge industrial music, leather lace, chains, spikes. That's the 90s extreme era, you know what I'm saying, man? And bringing Ghost Rider back, gothing them up a little bit, man. creating that cool ass bike. This thing was rad as hell.
Other
We're
comics
gonna have
started.
to look at some of his art more in depth because, like, I look at this thing and I just love it, and it's really simple that
Yeah.
image. And his art's sort of that way, you know. It's a lot of like that finish and the style and the heavy blacks and stuff. But I dig it, so yeah, I would definitely love to get into this a little further.
I've been going deep with Guardians of the Galaxy lately, especially after you guys talked to Jim Valentino, and I recognize this as one of the covers.
Yeah, look at
He
Valentino
does a fill-in
finishing.
issue that's pretty good. Mark
Yeah.
Teixeira of Guardians. Worth digging out of the quarter bins in the back. This is a fun article, too, because it gives his background, and it feels like, man, he was in comics and left comics and unsatisfied and did other stuff and came back to comics and left. It's like quite a journey to get to this point where he's doing Ghost Rider, and everybody's shocked at how successful it is, selling 500,000 copies a month without being Spider-Man or X-Men or really any promotion.
Just so, like, once again, speaks to that moment in time.
But I mean, look how great this is.
Oh,
This
it's
is
so
I'm
cool.
probably 13, 14, just loving this.
And he's hung in there, like he's still like a major force in comics.
He's good and he's different. You know, again, like you think of it as being like this is the Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld era. Texeira was doing his own thing and it stood out.
And they wanted him, you know, for like Generation 2. He did Union. He showed up in the Image books because super strong and super different. Had his own style.
Yeah, he's got a good run too of different comics from this era, from the early 90s, mid 90s that you can find, like some Punisher War Journals that are really good. Gives McFarlane some credit for McFarlane guested Ghost Rider and Spider-Man. And Texeira calls him out as being like he took some stuff from the McFarlane version of Ghost Rider that he worked into his own work. I always think that's kind of neat. So a very different artist who, you know, it took a while to kind of like build up that following, but found his niche. And, you know, I think people dig him because of that unique, his unique qualities.
Something about the print quality on this image, I'm feeling like some Barry Windsor Smith influence
On this?
on this Liefeld Youngblood.
It's funny that you call out the print quality there because, like, I don't know what this is.
I'm just running it through a photostat or something.
I don't know. It's weird. It feels like if you would scan an old comic book and the dots would show up or something. Like, I have no idea why this looks the way that it does in terms of the color and what we're seeing there with the textures.
Yeah, fuzzy.
Yeah, almost shot off a screen or something. It's really, really weird.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It's
Barry
working
Windsor
for
Smith.
me, though.
Yeah, it looks good. There's a lot of art in this article that I like.
Barry Windsor Smith would do that, have the little sheen on the skin and the costumes. And
Yeah,
stuff.
I think Scott Williams
over
made a
here.
comment in under one of our videos, and he was talking about how that's what they pulled that from was Barry Windsor Smith, and like they quit using it because they couldn't totally figure it out.
They were misappropriating it.
Yes, they tried it, but it was just it was too much. So this is awesome because, you know, at the time it's Liefeld's going to go off and do his indie book. I liked indie comics even back then, so that sounded really cool. Here's something: Image Comics not mentioned one time in this entire issue.
Malibu Comics.
Right.
Dave Olbrich is going to be the publisher of Youngblood. It's going to be 3 issues, and it's over. He's got 2 years worth of plans for the X-Force comic, but there will be future creator-owned comics, but he's going to just like write them. His pal Merritt Michaels is going to draw Brigade or
Yeah,
Black
Brigade's
Strike.
planned at this stage.
Now, looking at this stuff here, maybe you guys would know better, but like from what I understand, Liefeld likes to color his work like as he's working on it, and so even if it isn't like what's used in the color. And this looks like something he would have like hand colored.
I would bet
himself.
that's Brian Murray
You think?
color guides. Yeah, because
Okay.
I mean that's like watercolor, and you know that's Liefeld's doing a monthly book. Like I don't know that he has time to go that deep or anything.
I know he's talked about it being part of his process. It kind of helps him figure out like the shapes and stuff to kind
Have
of.
you seen any of it? I've never seen
I don't
anything.
know that
like
I have. That's why I was wondering if maybe this was it. You guys are the resident Liefeld scholars.
Also talks about that cable miniseries that he will
Yeah.
not be working on.
So disappointed that the cable miniseries never happened. Like, I loved all of this stuff. You know, at the time, this was probably my peak Liefeld fandom.
Sure.
And so, man, I was eating all of this stuff up. And I was so excited by X-Force, by cable, by these, I don't know, subplots that were running through that book.
The way this is written, it seems like this is like before the worm turned. This is like they're talking about Liefeld as this sort of like respected like guy, and so before he became like the punchline.
I thought that too. It's a really interesting tone because we know of him now as like, you know, the memes of the 40
Yes.
bad Liefeld drawings, or he doesn't draw feed, or he's late, or whatever. And I think you're right. It must have all happened after this because up to this point, like he's done a year on New Mutants that just elevated that book to a whole new level. Mostly, delivered it. I think there was 1 or 2 fill-in issues, but he was there monthly. Then does X-Force, and I don't know, we're 10 issues in or 8 issues in. And it's been coming out monthly with him. He sold 5 million copies. The book's coming out on time. Cable's still hot. I think it's a different perception of Liefeld than what would come even like 2 or 3 years later.
The things we see in his career, like there are constants that happen, right? He gets into a lot of scuffles with business partners and things like this. He's very public about it, and it makes you wonder, like, was there a specific situation that created the Image imprint? Like was Image kind of like the result? Because he seems in very like good favor with Marvel. He's going to be working on X-Force for a couple of years. He's got big plans for the future. And did he have like one of his dust-ups like he's had in recent time, where he just takes his ball and goes home, and like Image is a result of that? Like it seems like there's like a little bit of a deeper.
It is weird because you have guys like Liefeld planned to stay there. Valentino, I think, planned to stay at Marvel. But then, of course, McFarlane loves to tell the story about we got everybody together, walked into the office and said, "We're not working for you anymore. We don't have demands. We don't want something. We're just not working for you anymore." Because in my mind, it's always like Marvel was like, well, fired everybody, right? The guys who planned on sticking around. But maybe they didn't. Maybe it was that, whenever the guy walks in and says, "We're not working for you anymore," I mean, that's that, right?
So like, are you proposing that maybe like, so he has a dust up with Marvel, and then he has a dust up with Malibu, and then he goes to Image, or
no, like the Malibu thing. Whenever they put that in stone, it does seem like it was like a year contract. Like when it.
I think that was all worked out.
Yeah, when it wraps up, like there's no issue. But it just seems. I mean, this is early enough that it's Malibu. It's not Image. Like McFarlane isn't. McFarlane's still retired and chilling. Erik Larsen is drawing Spider-Man
we're gonna
comics.
We're going to see that
he's
article
in here too. Yeah,
This is an amazing document.
There's a lot of cool stuff in here. I love the early artwork that we're seeing from this. I really ate this stuff up. And looking at it this time, one thing real quick, I love that they mess with the type there. Like his hand busts up that top line. But this feels like indie books that I pull out of quarter bins. Like
Right.
it's really close
Black and
visually.
white explosion.
Yeah, and like hatching and stuff. It feels like it would kind of. I kind of want to see the black and white indie version of this book.
This is my.
you can pitch it.
You know what? Speaking of black and white versions of Rob Liefeld comics, I read that they are making a black and white version of the
G.I.
comic
Joe.
that we inked.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's coming in like October or something, man. That'll be fun to look at. All this stuff is imagery from Youngblood issue number 1. He's doing that piece where he's going down the list and letting you know everything about his rogues gallery. And there's one real fun piece where he's like, he's playing the pronoun game actually, and he's like, I have a couple of friends that are triplets.
Oh.
And they were like I was asking them like how does that happen? And it's about three sperms and an embryo or something like that. And what if those triplets milled into one, and that's Brahma? But of course the triplets are Tori from Saved by the Bell and his wife Joy Beth, man.
That's what I thought. I thought you were going to say he talks about one of the characters who poses as a Youngblood team member, but is really an investigative reporter. Like, I'm reading these descriptions, I'm like, oh man, that's great.
Yeah.
And he's not giving it away, but he was referring to her as she. So, that was your tip, that it was at least one of the women characters. But like, a lot of the descriptions he has for these characters in these stories all sound really good to me. The part I'm not sure about is Combat using his name in the sentence. Like, I'm built for this. I'm built for combat. So that results in me wandering around my house being like, I should have been dropping that when I was like 6 in gym class, where it's like, I'm built for this. I'm built for gym.
Yeah, we're at gym. I'm built for gym.
I love this stuff too, man. Like, anytime character designs were there, and especially little sketchy
Yeah,
character
I've seen
designs.
some of this stuff pop up, and it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I like it.
And just in case if you didn't realize, this magazine comes from the 90s, Badrock, a tragic figure. Not.
Look at how different, like, costume-wise, like, those pants look like they're oversized and kind of, like, slack material.
He does,
Keep your fly buttoned.
Yeah, he does kind of have that costume in some issues, man. That would be like white and red on the interior
I like
piece.
the screen tone, too, that he's putting on there.
Yeah.
Kind of neat.
Yeah.
He's all
and
in.
look, man, John Prophet.
Yeah, very detailed Prophet there. So, fun article. Like, it's kind of cool to see what his ideas were. not just in the characters in the book, but also the whole publishing arrangement. I think his plan, this is where he outlines that plan with Brigade was going to follow the 3-issue Youngblood, and then one more Youngblood miniseries after that is how much he has planned, and then that's probably it for a while.
This is also like a comic that was, 5-6 years coming at this point, because there was like the Megaton explosion.
And he talks about that.
Yeah, that was like the who's who. And you saw that 2-page spread of the Youngblood characters. It looked kind of different, but there are characters you recognize and things. So he talked about that. And he also said that there was a whole issue like penciled and stuff.
Yes.
Let me see that.
Would love to see that. Yeah, talked about maybe publishing that in this article.
Still hasn't been to this date, I don't think.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Hey, Rob, can the Kayfabe guys ink that gimmick, man? Like, I don't know that it can see the light of day anytime soon, but when that shit lapses, maybe we could we'll have a hit on our hands.
The last piece that's in this article, and it runs, this is when magazines used to be like continued on page 66.
I hate that shit.
He was going to do a Teen Titans book. And so like a lot of the Youngblood characters, or several of the Youngblood characters, some were for X-Force, and then he brought them back. Some were for this Teen Titans proposal, and he brought that back. And he was saying about how like that was his favorite book when he was a kid, X-Men and Teen Titans.
Yeah.
And like
The Perez.
he almost was going to be doing both at the same time. Man, you got to wonder if DC regretted not greenlighting that. So, moving on. Heroic Ideals, Tom Veitch, Rick Veitch's brother from Two-Fisted Tales.
Two-Fisted Zombies, and frequent collaborator with Greg Irons, man.
Yeah, the thing I know Tom Veitch from is those the Star Wars
Dark Empire,
which is a classic.
Like the best of those expanded universe joints.
Yeah, he gets into that. That's like the next big project that he's working on, and he's talking about doing Animal Man and wrapping that up because he doesn't think he could do 2 big books of that sort. That he's just, he kind of lives with this stuff, and Star Wars is where he's shifting. Sings the praises of Steve Dillon art, so that's kind of cool.
Dillon is real functional, man. It's super good.
John Ridgway.
Yeah, from 2000 AD.
I did not realize how much Tom Veitch was doing comics-wise. There's a good bit of output at this time period from him.
The Naz, man. You can find that in all the quarter bins.
A Commanding miniseries.
I have that thing. I think it's at Elseworlds. I seem to remember giant guns.
I think there was like Superman's costume or something. Was like from the Commandy issue. There's that one issue. But I feel like that showed up in there. I wonder if there's another issue of Comic Scene with Tom Veitch coverage. Slow Descent into Total Malevolence. This is probably the first time I see James O'Barr's Crow. This article. Talk about making an impression. Like, I saw that and fell in love. That's amazing looking.
So
that captured the time like perfectly.
Black and white comics I was into because that looked more like what I was drawing, and this one was like the best looking black and white comic ever.
Drew the
at least from these images.
Drew that first strip in like 82 or something, and it didn't see print in Caliber Presents for a while, years.
Yeah, sat on it. I think whoever did express interest wanted changes or something. Whatever it was, he kind of pulls it back, and so it would be a while before it actually comes out. So
I think
interesting
that's,
story from him too.
Absolutely, I think that's so cool, man, because you have your eager beaver types that just really desperately want to get in. They wanted his character to be Punisher, basically, and that was not the story he was trying to tell.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So he said no, and you don't see that in comics,
especially for a young guy.
Yeah.
I was just talking to somebody, and I was like, that first book that you do, you're going to make some mistakes in your deal.
Yeah, definitely.
So pretty good foresight. He had that vision of like you needed those flashback scenes that weren't violence to be the book he wanted it to be.
Well, specifically, he's talking about when he's making that last issue, and there's a severe body count. Like all of these dudes, dead.
Let the bodies hit the
and so like he's working on that sequence, but he doesn't want you to lose sight of the meaning behind this scene. So like that's what caused the delay for like the last issue of The Crow. He needed to like pepper in these flashbacks so that it's kind of like a love story.
How much does this image remind you of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Oh, sure, and his hair is Casey Jones' hair,
It's just like all the ingredients are there. It feels so much like flipping through this week. I was just like, wow, that's the Turtles, the original Turtles.
When you talk about like the goth aesthetic or whatever, Ed, I think it is really important that you have all the the brooding and the darkness and the bloodshed, but then you also have the sensitive side too that you're talking about.
Yeah, you're not to Joy Division if it's not.
Age 15, he has a run-in with Vaughn Baudet, who he credits as being encouraging and being a mentor and a very positive influence. And even though the art styles are different, he says like his use of lettering and stuff is something. So like the guy's into comics history, talks about the Eisner splash page in issue 1 of The Crow. So that's pretty cool. But the following year has a run-in with Dave Cockrum from X-Men fame at that time, who said his stuff was terrible and he was wasting his time. He said that he just kind of internalized that as like, I'm going to show this guy.
Yeah, we all have those stories.
By year's end, he had sold strips to Heavy Metal, Gasm, and 12 small press fanzines.
Mm-hmm.
That is how you do it.
It is how you do it, and what Dave Cockrum did is how you did that part too. Everybody has that story, and that was just the way it would go. It would be kind of like stretching a dude in pro wrestling terms, where you're a noob and you're showing up to the gym and you want to be a pro wrestler. Like, we need to send you on your way and see if you come back. You know, it's pie
totally.
May. And Cochran did sort of nothing wrong in that situation. You hear Frank Miller talk about visiting Continuity Studios, being sent away by Neil Adams, and just kept coming back. Can't be a bitch, man. You got to have, as a cartoonist, you got to have discipline. You got to be a self-starter. And if something as simple as somebody saying you're whack gets you to stop making comics, you're not built for the game, man.
When we tell you to get lost, we're helping you out, actually.
It's code for get better. He talks about how Caliber comes together. Gary Reed's working at a comic book store.
Has a comic shop. I think it's his own place.
And Vince Locke and Guy Davis are sort of like some of the regulars that hang out there, also artists. James O'Barr shows up with that dusty copy of The Crow. They kind of all look at it, and Gary Reed's like, maybe I should start publishing comics.
All amateurs, dude.
And sold 30,000 copies of issue 1.
Cute. It's cute.
It's pretty good in the post-black and white, implosion era. But I love these kind of stories. Like, man, talk about talent. Vince Locke,
Detroit, baby.
And then Guy Davis and James O'Barr hanging out.
And what's the first result of that, man? Caliber Presents 1. Check out our video of that, the Outlaw Comics Holy Grail.
Really strong stuff. The other piece that's in here is they talk about Bonesaw, his anthology from Tundra. It makes me want to go get a copy of that because I don't have that.
Never seen it in real life.
But it's definitely something that saw print. Like, those copies exist. And so he said, like, part of it is him and John Burgeon, the two co-editors of that, they would get, like, people would send them their comics. And they thought some of these amateur comics looked good enough to see print, and that's part of what they used for that that anthology. So it makes me curious because, like, we see what people send into Cartoonist Kayfabe. Really makes me curious to see it.
Okay, so
Tundra's interesting to begin with.
So it's not a complete James O'Barr piece, like probably just Slave Cylinder
in color.
Yeah, is like.
And I'm curious to see that, the color version.
It looks beautiful.
Of that.
Yeah, nice, like subtle palette.
Warped Imagination. This is a John Bolton feature, and mostly talking about his collaborations with Clive Barker.
Yes, the painted works, man, was new to me around this time, man. I knew his work very well from classic X-Men backup stories, and every month, like he would stretch himself and play with different styles and mess around with different storytelling techniques.
Changes his style so much because he changes so much.
Those backup stories in classic X-Men are like a really underappreciated like backbone of comics, I think.
I'm surprised. Are those collected? Like, that feels like that'd be the perfect collection. It's X-Men, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, they meant so much to me as like an early comics reader.
It was cool too because it's there's all this canon that's developing with the characters, but then outside forces, editorial is changing things, bringing Jean Grey back and things. So Claremont would use that set of pages as an opportunity to either flesh some things out or try to make sense of the retcons.
How cool is that?
Oh man, iconic to me, dude. That was in one of the boxes of comics that my pops got from the flea market. And
he tells a great story about how he wanted to make comics, but he's in England and not getting many opportunities. And then somehow a Marvel editor sees like one of his pieces somewhere and calls him and gives him a job. 56-page story. It's like his first
your first job. Yeah, not some 7-page backup.
All right. Erik Larsen doing Spider-Man, had taken over Amazing Spider-Man from McFarlane, but now he's doing adjectiveless Spider-Man again after McFarlane. And this is a fun series. Like, I bet we'll look at this. I recently put this back together because I had it. I bought it as a kid, got rid of it, and recently put it back together. But love it. It's like the Revenge of the Sinister Six, I think is the name of it. Like
or
a big
Return,
6-part piece. And he's like formed at this point. Like when he takes over that second Spider-Man series, he's writing it, he's penciling it, inking it, and it feels like that's Erik Larsen who's going to go on and do Savage Dragon at that point.
Yeah, I never had a lag, you know. Like I through inertia kept up with X-Force a little bit, but I was nonplussed by Mark Pacella. Started to get a little bit more enthusiasm with the Greg Capullo stuff, but it was fairly seamless to me with the Spider-Man comics, man.
Yeah.
I actually, I don't think I really kept up with Larson's Amazing Spider-Man work. Like, it was okay, but I was pretty much done after McFarlane left.
I really like his, like, all the Spider-Man stuff that you see here, even starting with, like, this image. That's a very attractive Spider-Man that he draws, and other characters. You know, the whole thing is, like, this is a good-looking series. If you're a Spider-Man fan, I would recommend it. Like, even just the throwaway kind of poses are... He's at the top of his Spider-Man game here.
He's good at that stuff, and I love Larson a lot because of his kayfabe muscles and shit. Like, he gets the tubes and the cylinders, like, where they should be, and then he's just, like, doing whatever. He's not sitting there with George Bridgman books trying to, get everything to look right. He's doing his thing. Use a little duotone on that piece.
Yeah, and a screen behind him.
Yep.
There's some really fun stuff in this article, too, where he talks about his psychology of choices he made for how to draw Spider-Man after McFarlane. There's certain stuff you got to keep. You know, like some of the exaggerated poses and things was something that it was like, well, that's what McFarlane's established. I got to do that. I got to have the legs over the heads and all this stuff. And it's stuff that I think he's really good at. Like, it looks really good. But it's interesting that that's something that he kind of looked at. How do I do Spider-Man, and what do I need to keep, and what can I bring on my own?
You know, he, like, this recently came out, like, online, but he might have been the one who invented the long Venom tongue, because he said he saw that McFarlane Venom, and in his mind he remembered it having this huge crazy tongue, but it actually didn't. So then when he went on, he would draw him with this huge crazy tongue just based on his incorrect memory of this thing.
I feel like all these dudes hate drawing Venom, but they would all add really cool stuff. Like, they kept pushing that design into what it becomes, and it was super cool to look at, even if it wasn't the character that they all liked.
He cites McFarlane as being so important for Spider-Man and being a sales tool. So like, he's not gonna, even though he likes Ditko stuff, he's not gonna take it back to that place. And he's very honest, man. The Sal Buscema has to draw Spider-Man a different way now. Alex Saviak has to draw Spider-Man a different way now. And Larson, he's dope, dude, because he's like, I'm going to give you guys a spoiler. You know what Dave Michelini's trying to do over there at Amazing Spider-Man? Get this. He wants to make another Venom character, but this one's going to be a bad guy. Can you believe that?
Carnage. This like Zipatone and stuff underneath, that feels like it harkens back to that, like, Frank Miller from, like, the Doctor Strange Spider-Man.
It's a great looking Spider-Man, right? Like, all of these Spider-Mans that they put out of here, hats off to the editorial that put the images together, because I think they all really make Larson shine. Also reveals that his Amazing Spider-Man outsold McFarlane's Amazing Spider-Man. So he takes over, and that's a tough spot, but really turned it into a success for him. I was
buying his, and it is like this. I mean, the same thing happened to Ditko. Like, the John Romita outsold the Ditko.
I think if you just look at his run, independent of, like, thinking it follows McFarlane or what else is going on, it's a great version of Spider-Man. It's super cartoony and animated and dynamic, very fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah, he should do some more Spider-Man comics.
Maybe. He does describe Hulk as being, like, his favorite character, but he loved where Hulk was at the time, and he said he didn't want to draw it because, like, making the comics, you don't really get to be the fan then.
Yes.
And he was enjoying the Hulk at the time. Del Keown calls out, and Peter David, of course. Ultraman, new Ultraman series in the works. So this is an overview of Ultraman and his history as a video character. And these are the different Ultraman series and how each one, varied.
Ultra 7 would always be the one that would be on TBS when I was a kid. And this, like, primed the pump. They kept trying to, like, put this down our throats and shit. And it was cool. And I was looking for it. There would be the Bandai toys and things. I was looking for it, but I never saw it. It must have been in syndication, but just never got picked up in Pittsburgh. But seeing that in the commercials, there would be, the kaiju gimmick with the little cardboard buildings and stuff. You didn't get any of that here in Pittsburgh. So that just primed that pump when Power Rangers, like, really came out. And I was, like, ready to go fully on board.
This version, they were filming it, I think, in Australia. about $400,000 an episode, and they bought the miniatures from Total Recall. They were unused. They had built the miniatures for a set in there.
That's awesome.
Bought them for a couple $1,000 so they could blow them up.
This picture is like pure joy.
Yeah. Yeah, this article's fun, it's a cool character, and it's like, this is the history of Ultraman, for somebody like me that knows nothing and has no background. Is pretty fun. This is Shadow Man. So Dave Lapham and Steve Englehart's Valiant character. Jim Shooter's still at Valiant at this time. Yeah. This was the first Valiant comic I probably bought. I bought Shadow Man #1 off of the stands. Very underwhelmed by this. Englehart just keeps banging the drum about how this is jazz, is improv jazz is what's the behind this storytelling, and tries to explain it, and I can't see it. Like
the same way as when someone explains improv jazz to you in other settings.
Fair enough.
You know what would really make this comic sing? No pun intended, though. If there was a special guest appearance by Dickie Betts.
Dude, they talk about it. One of the lawyers, he describes as like one of the lawyers from Valiant is connected to Rock and Roll Stars, so they're going to be guest starring in the book.
Yeah, that's that Steve Mazarsky guy.
Terrible.
And the fact that, like, that's the sales mechanism to try to get you to buy. Like, Aerosmith might show up in a future issue, and I think they do.
The one thing that makes me mad about this comic scene is, like, there are several of these articles where I'm like, Dave Lapham, let's get some Dave Lapham. Barely mentioned.
It's an after mag.
Same thing with Dwayne Turner in the Cage series, where it's like it's barely mentioned that this is your artist. No interview with him, nothing, and that's kind of makes me mad.
Comic scene is an after mag, dude. It keeps kayfabe, and it's about Thanos versus Darkseid type conversation.
You could see how artists would have like an attitude about that kind of coverage, because like you sort of have to fight to get your name in print. If you're a writer. You already feel like the writer does a lot less of the heavy lifting, and yet they're the ones who are like the spokesman for this stuff.
It's one of the great things that I picked up from guys like McFarlane, man, who constantly would say things like, "There's not one other person on this like planet full of 6 billion people who's going to wake up today and advocate for me, so right. I have to do it."
I saw Beauty and the Beast in the theater when I was in high school.
Yeah.
I mean,
a date movie.
It was like a breakthrough at the time. It was
neat. There was some cool stuff that I think was 3D, where there's like a dance scene and like characters would reflect on the floor, and I think that was some kind of early 3D.
Early CGI, and it it premiered at some film festival, maybe Sundance or something, but it premiered in its black and white pencil form.
Oh man,
and it was a huge hit. Yeah, it looks amazing in that.
I bet there's
form.
footage of that out there. If it played somewhere, I'm sure that stuff exists.
Yeah, they did
somewhere.
a documentary about it.
They talk with the screenwriter who hashed that
Once
story
again,
up.
all the writers.
Yeah. And I just thought it was so cool, like, because you just never think, you just imagine that shit is all writing by committee, and that it would be impossible for just like an average person to submit something on spec. Now, she's not an average person. She had like YA novels and kids books and shit, and she gave it a shot. Sent them a script for something. They dug her work. She did some kind of Winnie the Pooh stuff, but like it's kind of sight unseen in a way. Like they hooked her up, and I just never thought about that part of that operation. There's a great documentary that like could never come out in like a real capacity because of like legal and stuff, but it's leaked online, called The Sweat Box. And there was a film called The Emperor's New Clothes or something like that, The Emperor's New Groove, some shit like this, and it follows the gestation of this flick. It goes through all the changes and shows you all the different changes. It's maddening, the system that they have constructed. It was made by
It makes me anxious hearing that description.
Sting was provided the soundtrack, and like part of his deal was, you have to let my wife make a documentary of like the whole process. So that's what this is, and it never received the proper clearances and rights and stuff. But you can watch the whole thing, and it's really fascinating to see how like this stuff is like really corporatized and whittled down to be like as inoffensive and as baby food.
That was that was like a later movie. Like at this point, Disney was in kind of like a position that a lot of like comics companies kind of find themselves in, where they're like, nothing's working. They're kind of giving up. And so you have a little more leeway to like, hey, let's try this.
It was like Little Mermaid, I feel like was like the first one. Because they just kept doing duds, and then they just started being hit makers.
Yeah.
Family Dog. I know nothing about Family Dog.
I remember its existence.
Yeah.
This seems kind of subversive kind of image.
And I think it spun out of Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories, which I was a fan of Amazing Stories. I was a fan of animation in general, but when this show would come on, I would change the channel.
It's the funny thing with these kind of magazines, and part of the reason I would shift at this time to Wizard is because this did cover a lot of stuff, some that I wasn't interested in. In some cases, it was great. It would expose me to some things that I wouldn't know otherwise, because it was kind of a cross-section of different interests that would be represented in a random issue of comics.
Yeah, it's like a general purpose magazine. And you know, the graphic design at this time, too, like Wizard had like a little more cutting edge, a little more like kid-centered graphic design.
Just more colored signatures.
Video game magazines went through a similar thing at the same time. There were kind of these like stodgy computer and video gaming magazines, and then like you had like Electronic Gaming Monthly and stuff where they were kind of
this stuff is
around.
Funny to see like the status of the different properties and where they are in development. Like it was such an obsession of comics fans, apparently based on these publications, for any kind of translation into other media.
Sure.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's your comic scene. Although,
go buy your Youngbloods.
I was gonna say, like, do they mention Image Comics here? Like, are they already selling Youngblood before Image Comics is, defined or
That's what it looks like.
Wow.
But you know how the game is played, man. This shows up months before, and you could kind of change things, on a dime in a way, like pretty close to print time.
And I'm guessing like the first issue of Detective Comics didn't have a Detective Comics corner circle, or what I mean?
Right,
like
yeah.
they figured out the name of the company a little later.
Lobo's back, #1. It makes me realize, and Simon Bisley. This is the third Simon Bisley name drop in this issue. Two different artists cite him as being influential. And Erik Larsen's next big project that's in the books and ready to go is a Lobo miniseries. In this interview with Keith Giffen, Keith Giffen and Alan Grant, the writing team of Lobo, like he was signed up to do a Lobo miniseries and seemed pretty pumped for it, and that makes me sad.
Yeah.
I would have loved that. Would have been a good fit for that character. I think Larson could have really made Lobo. It was the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
Found all these comic scenes, in digital. I don't know that Starlog will come calling if we go through some of those early ones in a digital format. I got plenty of issues, tangible issues myself. What I'm saying is I don't think this will be the last issue of Comics Scene.
There's definitely a few more that were big for me when I was a kid, so I'd be curious to revisit those.
We're going to have to pull those in front of the microscope. Kayfabers, like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell. We'll notify you when new vids are available. Jimmy, what's out there?
Join me on patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can download out-of-print zines and mini comics, including pencils, scripts, notes on how I make the comics that I make, all of that and a lot more at patreon.com/JimRugg.
Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, Fantastic Four Grand Design, my YouTube channel, Total Recall Show, and my Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Tom Scholey.
Red Room Comics in the Wild, every issue completely self-contained. Get them while they're hot. You can read the comics before they hit paper at my Patreon, patreon.com/EdPiskor, $3 for the archive there. New strips every Tuesday, and if you go there, the free Comic Book Day comic is up there incomplete for free.
It sounds like you say it's up there incomplete. Subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video. You can also find Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts and merchandise at the links below this video.
Give them those marching orders, Jimmy. We're going to be on our way.
Make more comics.